My wife stopped me from entering our house to ask, "What did you do with my sister?" "I didn't do anything to your sister." I trailed off when I saw Mariella, her hoe of a sister, through the crack of the door. She was crying on our couch while their father Edgar rubbed her back. Mascara streaked down Mariella's face, and she was clutching a tissue box like it was a D. The living room looked like a war zone with wedding magazines scattered everywhere, and what looked like a ripped veil on the coffee table. "Wait, what's going on here? Did she say I did something? I promise you I'd never sleep with her. Her hoo-ha stinks." I tried to push past Jordan, but she held firm. "I can't believe you're trying to act innocent." She wound up and slapped me across the face. The sting spread across my cheek as she continued, "Never come back here again." The door slammed in my face. I stood there stunned on my own porch, trying to process what just happened. Jordan and I had been married for 5 years. Mariella was supposed to get married next month to some investment banker named Chad. What could I have possibly done to cause this scene? Then I remembered I needed to get my dog. Rex was probably confused by all the yelling, and I wasn't leaving without him. He was a German Shepherd I'd raised from a puppy before I even met Jordan. I knocked on the door, trying to stay calm. After a minute, it opened, but instead of Jordan, it was Mariella. Her face was red and puffy from crying. She looked at me with pure hatred. "Why can't you understand to just leave us alone? You ruined everything. You're a disgusting pervert who can't stay out of people's business." She was practically screaming. "I don't want to be in your fishy business. Can I just get my dog back?" I managed to squeeze in between her rants. She slammed the door again. I could hear Rex barking inside, which made me more determined. I knocked again, then again. For 30 minutes I stood there knocking and calling for my dog. The neighbors were starting to peek through their curtains. Mrs. Henderson from across the street was pretending to water her plants while watching the drama unfold. Finally, the door flew open, and Edgar stormed out. Jordan's father was a big man who'd worked construction his whole life. Before I could react, he grabbed my arm and twisted it behind my back. He marched me to my car and slammed me against the hood. The metal was still warm from the sun, and my cheek pressed against it painfully. "No police can save you after what you did to my daughter's wedding." His breath was hot on my neck. That's when it clicked. The wedding magazines, Mariella's tears, the accusation about ruining everything. It all made sense now. Wait, is this because I told her husband that she was cheating on him? Edgar's grip got even tighter on my arm, and I could feel his fingers digging into my skin. "Yeah, I told Chad about Mariella cheating with that guy from her gym." I gasped out, my face still pressed against the warm metal of my car hood. His face turned an even darker shade of red, and he shoved me harder against the car, making the whole thing rock on its tires. Rex was barking like crazy inside the house now, probably sensing something was really wrong. "You destroyed my daughter's life over what? Being a snitch?" Edgar's voice was right in my ear, spit hitting my neck as he talked. I tried to turn my head to explain that Chad deserved to know before he married a cheater, but Edgar just pressed down harder, making my ribs hurt against the hood. Mrs. Henderson had completely given up any pretense of watering her plants and was just standing there in her front yard, garden hose in hand, staring at us with her mouth hanging open. Edgar finally let me go with one last hard shove that sent me stumbling toward my car door. "Get off my property and never come back," he said, standing there with his arms crossed like some kind of bouncer. I grabbed the door handle to steady myself while my arm throbbed where he'd grabbed it, and I could already feel the bruises forming under my shirt. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with my keys and got into the driver's seat. Edgar stood there watching me the whole time, making sure I actually left. I backed out of the driveway and drove maybe 3 blocks before I had to pull into a grocery store parking lot because my hands were shaking too bad to drive safely. I sat there in my car, trying to process everything that had just happened in the last hour. My phone started buzzing on the passenger seat, and I saw text after text from Jordan popping up on the screen. I picked it up and scrolled through them, each one worse than the last. She called me a homewrecker, said I was dead to her, told me I'd ruined everything, and said she never wanted to see me again. The last one just said I was the worst mistake of her life. I realized with a sick feeling in my stomach that I had nowhere to go tonight since I obviously couldn't go back to my own house. I scrolled through my contacts and called Jackson, my buddy from high school who'd been in my wedding party. He picked up on the second ring, and I could hear a TV in the background. "Hey man, I need a place to crash tonight," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Jordan kicked me out. There was a pause, and then Jackson said he'd text me his address since he'd moved recently, and to come right over. I drove across town to Jackson's apartment complex, a nice place with a pool and everything. He met me at the door and took one look at my face before stepping aside to let me in. His wife Katie was sitting on the couch, and she got up when she saw me, asking if I was okay. I sat down on their couch and finally told them the whole story from the beginning. About 3 weeks ago, I'd gone to the gym after work, the one near the mall that Mariella went to. I wasn't looking for her or anything, just trying to get my workout in. But when I was leaving, I saw her in the parking lot with this muscle-head trainer, and they definitely weren't talking about workout routines. They were all over each other, making out against his truck like a couple of teenagers who couldn't wait to get home. His hands were all over her, and she was practically climbing him. I'd taken a quick video on my phone because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Mariella was supposed to be getting married to Chad in a month, and here she was dry humping some gym bro in broad daylight. Katie brought me a beer from their fridge and sat back down, shaking her head as I continued the story. "You did the right thing telling Chad," she said when I finished explaining how I'd sent him the video yesterday. "He deserved to know before the wedding." Jackson agreed and said Mariella was trash for cheating in the first place. They showed me to their spare bedroom and gave me some towels for the morning. That night I lay in their guest bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. All I could think about was Rex alone in that house with all those angry people. He was probably so confused and scared with all the yelling and drama that had happened. He'd never been away from me for more than a day or two when I went on business trips. I grabbed my phone and texted Jordan, asking if I could at least come get my dog since he had nothing to do with any of this. I watched the message show as delivered, but she never responded. The next morning, I woke up early and called the non-emergency police line while Jackson and Katie were getting ready for work. The officer who answered listened to my situation and said they could do something called a civil standby, where an officer would come with me to get essential items from the house. She said they could schedule it for 2 days from now if that worked for me. I agreed and wrote down the case number she gave me. After I hung up, I tried calling Jordan to let her know about the civil standby, but the call wouldn't go through. I tried again and got a message saying the number I was calling wasn't accepting calls from me. She'd blocked me. I tried calling Edgar's phone and got the same thing. Then Mariella's number, same result. They'd all blocked me completely, cutting me off from my own family after 5 years of marriage. The only way I could even try to communicate was through email, which felt completely insane. I opened my laptop and typed out an email to Jordan, trying to be reasonable and calm. I explained that Rex was legally mine since I'd adopted him 2 years before we even met. I'd raised him from an 8-week-old puppy, paid all his vet bills, and had all the paperwork in my name. I attached photos of his adoption papers from the shelter, his microchip registration, and years of vet records all showing me as the sole owner. I asked her to please be reasonable about this, since Rex was innocent in all of this drama. About an hour later, I got her response, just one line that made my stomach drop. "You destroyed my family. You get nothing." I stared at the screen for a few seconds before closing the laptop and pushing it away from me on Jackson's kitchen table. Katie walked over with a fresh cup of coffee and set it down next to me, then pulled out a chair and sat down. She worked as a paralegal at a law firm downtown and had seen tons of family fights turn into huge legal messes. She told me I needed to start saving everything right now, every text, every email, every nasty message they sent me. I grabbed my phone and started taking screenshots of all the texts from yesterday, the ones where Jordan called me a homewrecker and said I was dead to her and that I was the worst mistake of her life. Katie showed me how to back them up to the cloud and also email them to myself, so I'd have multiple copies. She said family disputes could get really ugly, really fast, and I needed to protect myself with documentation. I spent the next hour going through my phone and saving everything while Katie made breakfast for all of us. My phone started ringing while I was eating, and I didn't recognize the number but decided to answer it anyway. It was Chad, and his voice sounded tired and rough, like he hadn't slept much. He thanked me for telling him the truth about Mariella and said he'd had some suspicions, but needed actual proof before he could do anything about it. He told me he was calling off the wedding completely and had already started telling people it was canceled. I could hear papers shuffling in the background while he talked, and he said he was going through all the contracts trying to figure out what deposits he could get back. He explained that when he first confronted Mariella with the video I'd sent him, she tried to deny everything and said it must have been someone who looked like her. Then, when he showed her the clear shot of her face, she changed her story and said she was drunk, and it was just one mistake that didn't mean anything. But he kept pushing, and finally she admitted she'd been seeing the gym trainer for 3 months, meeting up with him 2 or 3 times a week when she said she was at yoga or book club or visiting friends. Chad said the wedding vendors were being pretty understanding, and some were giving him partial refunds, since there was still a month before the wedding date. I felt bad for the guy losing all that money, but also felt vindicated that I'd done the right thing by telling him. After I hung up with Chad, I remembered our house had one of those doorbell cameras that recorded everything, and I still had the app on my phone. I opened it up and scrolled back to yesterday afternoon when Edgar had grabbed me and slammed me against my car. The footage was crystal clear, showing him twisting my arm behind my back and pushing me against the hood while I wasn't fighting back at all, just trying to leave. You could even see Mrs. Henderson in the background watching the whole thing from her yard. I downloaded the video to my phone and made multiple backups of it just like Katie had shown me with the texts. 2 days passed with more angry emails from Jordan and nothing about Rex. Then finally the police officer called to confirm our appointment for the civil standby. I drove to my house and met the officer in front. A young guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else but here dealing with domestic drama. Jordan answered the door with Edgar right behind her, both of them glaring at me like I was some kind of criminal who'd broken into their house. The officer explained in a bored voice that I was just there to collect essential items and my dog, and that everyone needed to stay calm and civil. Jordan immediately said Rex was her dog too since we were married and had been together for 5 years. I pulled out my phone and showed the officer the photos I'd saved of Rex's adoption paperwork from the shelter, dated 2 years before I'd even met Jordan, plus all his vet records with only my name on them and the microchip registration showing me as the sole owner. The officer looked at the papers and said it seemed pretty clear to him, but he couldn't force her to hand over the dog since this was a civil matter that needed to be handled in court. I wanted to scream, but forced myself to stay calm and asked if I could at least get some of my stuff from inside. The officer nodded, and Jordan stepped aside to let us in, but Edgar followed right behind me the whole time like he was making sure I didn't take anything that wasn't mine. I grabbed some clothes from the bedroom dresser and shoved them in a bag, then got my laptop from the home office and some important documents from the filing cabinet like my passport and birth certificate and tax returns. When I went to the laundry room to get Rex's leash and his special food for his sensitive stomach, Jordan physically stepped in front of me and blocked the doorway with her arms crossed. The officer suggested we should probably resolve the dog situation in court if we couldn't agree, and that I had enough stuff for now, so we should go. Back at Jackson's apartment, I threw the bag of clothes on the floor and slumped on the couch, completely devastated about leaving Rex behind again. Katie came over and sat next to me, then pulled out her phone and looked up a contact. She gave me the name of a divorce attorney named Hudson Fontana, who worked at a firm that handled messy family cases and said he was really good at dealing with complicated situations. I called his office right away and made an appointment for the next morning. Hudson's office was in a tall building downtown, and he turned out to be this older guy with gray hair who looked like he'd seen everything. I told him the whole story from the beginning and showed him all the documentation I'd saved, the texts, the emails, the doorbell camera footage, and all of Rex's paperwork. He reviewed everything carefully and said I had a really strong case for getting Rex back since I had clear proof of sole ownership from before the marriage. He also said Edgar assaulting me could be grounds for a restraining order if I wanted to pursue that. We decided to start with a formal demand letter to Jordan, requiring her to return Rex within 48 hours, or we'd file for emergency possession in court. Hudson said he'd have it ready by the end of the day and would send it by certified mail and email to make sure she got it. I was walking back to my car when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Mrs. Henderson saying she'd seen everything that happened with Edgar and would be willing to provide a witness statement if I needed it for court or anything else. She said Edgar had no right to put his hands on me like that, and she was appalled by the whole situation. I texted her back thanking her and immediately forwarded her contact information to Hudson so he could follow up with her about getting a formal statement. Hudson called me that afternoon to say the demand letter was ready, and he'd already sent it by certified mail to Jordan's house, plus emailed it to her personal account. The letter laid out everything clearly, how Rex was mine before the marriage with all the adoption papers and vet records proving it, and she had 48 hours to return him, or we'd file for emergency possession in court. He also mentioned we had video evidence of Edgar assaulting me and Mrs. Henderson as a witness who saw the whole thing, which might help them realize this wasn't just going away. I spent the rest of the day refreshing my email and checking my phone every 5 minutes, hoping Jordan would come to her senses and just give me my dog back. That evening, while I was eating takeout at Jackson's kitchen table, my phone started blowing up with texts from mutual friends asking what was going on. I opened Facebook and saw Mariella had posted this long, dramatic thing about how her wedding was ruined by a jealous family member who couldn't stand to see her happy and wanted to destroy her life out of pure spite. She didn't use my name, but everyone who knew us could figure out she meant me, and the comments were already piling up with people offering sympathy and calling whoever did this to her a monster. My first instinct was to comment with screenshots of her cheating texts, or post my own version telling everyone the truth about her sleeping with the gym trainer for 3 months. Katie saw me typing and grabbed my phone, telling me not to sink to their level and that posting drama online would just make me look bad in court. Instead, I started texting close friends one by one, explaining what really happened, how I'd caught Mariella cheating and told Chad because he deserved to know before marrying her. Most of them were shocked, but said I did the right thing, that Chad had a right to know what he was getting into, though a couple said I should have minded my own business and let them work it out themselves. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Jordan saying she'd give Rex back, but only if I signed this document her lawyer drafted saying I wouldn't discuss Mariella's personal matters with anyone ever again. I forwarded it to Hudson, who called me within 10 minutes saying absolutely not, that signing anything limiting my right to speak truthfully about what happened would be a huge mistake. He drafted a response declining their offer and reiterating that Rex was my property and needed to be returned immediately without conditions. That afternoon, Chad called me sounding stressed, saying Edgar had been calling him non-stop, demanding he pay for all the canceled wedding expenses since he was the one who called it off. Edgar was threatening to sue him for the deposits they'd lost on the venue and catering and everything else, even though it was Mariella who cheated and caused the whole mess. Chad was thinking about getting a restraining order against Edgar and wanted to know if I'd had similar problems with him making threats. I told him about Edgar grabbing me and slamming me against my car, and we realized Edgar had been harassing both of us, trying to intimidate us into backing down. 3 days passed with no response to the demand letter. Then Hudson got an email from a lawyer representing Jordan saying Rex was marital property, since we'd been married 5 years, and she had equal claim to him. They were refusing to return him, and said if we wanted to pursue this further, we'd have to go through the courts. Hudson wasn't surprised, and said we'd file for emergency possession right away, that judges usually sided with whoever owned the pet before marriage, especially with clear documentation like we had. I couldn't stop thinking about Rex stuck in that house, probably confused about why I hadn't come back for him. So I drove by my old street that evening just to check on him. When I pulled up, I could see him in the backyard through the fence, and the second he saw my car, he ran over and started whimpering and pawing at the gate trying to get to me. It killed me to see him like that, desperately wanting to come with me. So I got out and walked to the fence to pet him through the slats. He was crying and licking my hand, and I had to force myself not to just open the gate and take him, but I pulled out my phone and recorded him going crazy, trying to get to me as evidence that I was his primary human. Jordan must have seen me because she came storming out the back door yelling at me to get off her property. So I got back in my car and drove away with Rex still crying at the fence. Hudson filed the emergency motion the next day, and we got a hearing date for the following week, which felt like forever to wait, but he said it was actually pretty fast for the court system. He was confident we'd win since I had all the ownership documents from before the marriage, and now video showing Rex's clear preference for me, saying judges took pet custody seriously and usually ruled based on who had the stronger claim. While all this was happening, I realized I couldn't stay at Jackson and Katie's forever. They'd been amazing, but sleeping in their spare room was only supposed to be temporary. I started looking for apartments online and found a place about 20 minutes away that allowed dogs and had a small yard, so I put down a deposit and planned to move in the next month. That night, I was scrolling Instagram when I got a message from some guy I didn't recognize, but when I opened it, I realized it was the trainer from Mariella's gym. He said Mariella had told him she was single when they started hooking up, and he had no idea she was engaged to someone else until everything blew up. He felt bad about the whole situation and said if I needed him to testify or provide a statement that Mariella pursued him and lied about her relationship status, he'd be willing to help. I saved his message in case I needed it later, but honestly, I just wanted my dog back more than anything else. The day before the hearing, my phone buzzed with an email from Jordan saying we needed to talk about dividing everything, not just Rex, that she wanted to discuss the house and our bank accounts and all our stuff. Hudson called me right after I forwarded it to him and told me not to meet with her alone under any circumstances, that this was probably an attempt to get me to agree to something stupid before court. The hearing was at 9 in the morning and I barely slept the night before thinking about Rex stuck in that house without me. I got to the courthouse early and sat in my car watching other people walk in for their own problems, while Hudson texted that he was 5 minutes out. The courtroom was smaller than I expected with wood paneling and uncomfortable benches that made my back hurt immediately. The judge looked tired already, and it was only 9:30 when our case got called up. Hudson handed over all our evidence, including the adoption papers, vet records showing I paid for everything, and the video of Rex going crazy trying to get to me through the fence. The judge flipped through the papers, while Jordan's lawyer argued that pets acquired during marriage were joint property, regardless of who bought them. I could see Jordan sitting at the other table refusing to look at me while her lawyer talked. The judge cut him off mid-sentence and said this was clearly my dog from before the marriage, and he couldn't believe this was even taking up court time. He ordered Jordan to return Rex within 24 hours, or face contempt charges. My eyes got watery, but I managed not to actually cry in the courtroom. Hudson shook my hand outside and said he'd arrange for police to come with me tomorrow to make sure there were no problems getting Rex back. That night, I actually slept okay, knowing I'd have my dog back soon. The next morning, a cop met me at my old house and knocked on the door while I stood behind him on the porch. Jordan answered, looking mad as hell, but she couldn't do anything with the officer standing right there holding the court order. She disappeared inside, and I could hear Rex barking, and then his nails clicking on the hardwood as he ran toward the door. The second he saw me, he went absolutely crazy, jumping up and putting his paws on my chest, while crying these high-pitched whines I'd never heard him make before. His whole body was shaking, and he kept licking my face and hands like he couldn't believe I was really there. Jordan stood in the doorway with tears running down her face, but they looked more mad than sad, like she was crying from being so angry about losing. Edgar wasn't there this time, which was probably smart since the cop was watching everything. I clipped Rex's leash on and grabbed his food and bowls that Jordan had put in a bag by the door. Rex pressed against my leg the whole walk to the car, like he was scared I might disappear again. The apartment I'd rented was ready, and I took Rex there straight from picking him up. He sniffed around confused at first, checking every room and then coming back to find me like he was making sure I was still there. I'd bought him a new bed and some toys at the pet store the day before, trying to make it feel more like home for him. That first night, he wouldn't sleep in his new bed, instead pressing himself against my leg on my bed like he needed to touch me to know I wasn't going anywhere. 3 days later, my phone lit up with a text from Chad saying he'd started seeing a therapist to deal with everything and asking if I wanted to grab a beer sometime to talk. It felt weird that I might become friends with the guy who was supposed to marry my sister-in-law, but we were the only two people who'd stood up to their family's lies. Hudson called that week saying we needed to start working on divorce paperwork, since it was obvious Jordan and I were done after she chose her cheating sister over her husband, who just told the truth. The marriage was broken beyond fixing at this point. I was at Jackson's place helping him install a new TV mount when we heard pounding on the door and Mariella screaming my name from outside. Katie looked through the peephole and said absolutely not, that she wasn't letting that crazy woman in their home. Mariella kept screaming that I ruined her life and she needed to talk to me right now. Katie opened the door just enough to tell her to leave, or she'd call the cops. Mariella tried to push past her, but Katie blocked the doorway and pulled out her phone to actually dial 911. Mariella finally left, but not before screaming more stuff about how I destroyed everything. Jackson went online that night and ordered a doorbell camera, so they could see who was outside before opening the door again. 2 weeks later, I was eating lunch, when some guy I'd never seen before walked up to my table and handed me an envelope. Inside were divorce papers with Jordan listed as the petitioner asking for the house and half of everything else we owned. Hudson wasn't surprised when I called him and said her filing first didn't matter, since we'd end up with the same result either way. We'd fight for a fair split of everything. The mediation was scheduled for a month later in some boring conference room downtown. Jordan finally looked at me for the first time since court and said she knew Mariella had been cheating the whole time, but family comes first, no matter what. She said I betrayed that basic rule by going to Chad instead of keeping it in the family where it belonged. I sat there realizing we had completely different values about basic right and wrong. The mediator cleared his throat and pushed papers across the table showing our assets and debts, while I tried not to look at Jordan, who kept wiping her eyes with tissues. We both knew the house was too expensive for either of us alone, so agreeing to sell it took about 5 minutes of discussion with the mediator writing down the terms. The rest of our stuff got divided pretty fast since we both just wanted this done, and neither of us fought over the furniture or kitchen stuff or any of that. Rex stayed curled at my feet through the whole meeting, and I kept reaching down to pet him whenever things got tense. That night my phone buzzed with a text from Edgar saying I wasn't welcome at any family events anymore, and he'd make sure everyone knew what kind of man I really was. I screenshot it and sent it to Hudson, who said to save everything in case we needed that restraining order later, but I didn't respond to Edgar, since there was nothing left to say. The house went on the market 2 weeks later and sold way faster than we expected, with some young couple offering full asking price, which meant I had enough for a down payment on a small townhouse across town. Rex ran around the new backyard sniffing every corner while I unpacked boxes and tried not to think about how different everything was from just a few months ago. The best part was being away from Mrs. Henderson and her constant watching since my new neighbors minded their own business and didn't pretend to water plants while staring at me. Chad texted asking if I wanted to grab that beer he mentioned, and we met at a sports bar downtown where he pulled out his phone to show me texts from Mariella. She was begging him to take her back and blaming everything on me, saying I poisoned him against her and made up lies about the trainer, which made us both laugh since we knew the truth. He scrolled through message after message of her saying she never loved the trainer and it was just a mistake, and I was jealous of her happiness, which was so crazy we ordered another round. 3 months crawled by with paperwork and waiting, but finally the divorce got finalized, and I stood outside the courthouse holding the papers that said my marriage was officially over. My chest felt heavy, but also lighter somehow, like I could breathe better, even though part of me was sad about how everything ended. A week later, I was grabbing milk at the grocery store when I turned the corner and almost ran my cart into Mariella, who immediately started yelling that I was a homewrecker. Other shoppers stopped to stare while she kept going on about how I ruined her life and destroyed her wedding and couldn't stand to see her happy. I just turned my cart around and walked away while she kept screaming behind me until a security guard came over asking if I needed help, but I just wanted to get out of there. Katie called me a few days later saying she wanted me to meet her friend Daniela Stewart, who just moved here for a job at the hospital and thought we'd get along. We all met at the dog park, where Daniela brought her golden retriever Bailey, who immediately started playing with Rex, like they'd known each other forever. Daniela and I talked about dogs and hiking trails, and she laughed when I told her about Rex being held hostage during the divorce, which led to me explaining the whole crazy story. She couldn't believe I got punished for telling the truth about Mariella cheating and said her ex had cheated too, so she understood wanting honesty in relationships. We started meeting at the dog park regularly, and then grabbing coffee after, while Rex and Bailey played, until one day she suggested we try dinner without the dogs. Both of us moved slow since we'd been burned before, but it felt nice talking to someone who valued the same things I did about trust and honesty. She thought the whole family choosing lies over truth was insane and said she would have done the same thing telling Chad about the affair. 6 months after everything blew up, I got mail from Chad with a fancy envelope inside containing a wedding invitation to his marriage to someone named Sarah he met at his therapy group. He wrote a note on the invitation saying I gave him the gift of truth, and he'd always be grateful for saving him from a marriage built on lies. I asked Daniela if she wanted to go as my date, and she said yes immediately since she wanted to see how this whole crazy story wrapped up. The wedding was beautiful and small, with maybe 50 people in a garden venue downtown where Chad looked happier than I'd ever seen him. Mariella obviously wasn't there, but I heard from someone at the reception that she was still single and bitter about everything. The trainer had dumped her after finding out she lied about being single when they met, and now she was alone, blaming everyone but herself for how things turned out. 3 weeks after Chad's wedding, my phone buzzed with a text from Jordan saying she missed Rex and wanted to visit him. I stared at the message for a minute before deleting it without responding. She made her choice when she picked her lying sister over our marriage, and Rex was perfectly happy living with me. The next morning, I was making coffee when Katie called to tell me Edgar had a heart attack and was in the hospital. Despite everything he'd done, I went to the card store and picked out a simple get well card that just said I hoped he recovered. I mailed it to the hospital without a return address, since I didn't want any drama, but felt like doing the right thing. 2 days later, Jordan texted me saying not to bother pretending to care about her father, and that my fake sympathy wasn't welcome. I realized then that some bridges were completely burned and could never be rebuilt, no matter what. Edgar did recover after a week in the hospital, but the whole family situation had taken its toll on everyone involved. I ran into one of their neighbors at the hardware store who told me Edgar and Mariella barely spoke anymore. The canceled wedding had cost the family over $20,000 in lost deposits, and Edgar blamed Mariella for the whole mess. Sometimes consequences really do catch up with people, even if it takes a while. Meanwhile, things with Daniela kept getting better, and after dating for about a year, we decided to move in together. Rex was thrilled about the arrangement, especially since it meant Bailey would be living with us too. We joked that the dogs had planned the whole thing just to become roommates, since they were inseparable at the dog park. Finding a rental that allowed 2 big dogs took some work, but we eventually found a nice house with a huge backyard. The dogs spent hours chasing each other around while we unpacked boxes and figured out how to merge 2 lives into one space. Work had been going really well too, since I could finally focus without all the family drama hanging over my head. My boss pulled me aside one afternoon and offered me a promotion to senior project manager with a nice raise. He said I seemed happier and more confident lately, which was making a difference in my performance. Standing up for the truth, even when it cost me my marriage, had actually made me stronger as a person. A few months after the promotion, Jackson called with big news that Katie was pregnant, and they wanted me to be the godfather. They came over for dinner, and Katie said watching me handle the divorce with dignity had shown them what real character looked like. Rex seemed to understand something special was happening and kept sniffing Katie's belly like he knew there was a baby in there. I was honored they wanted me involved in their kid's life after everything they'd done for me during the divorce. Time kept moving forward, and before I knew it, 2 years had passed since that crazy day Jordan kicked me out. Daniela and I decided to get married in a small ceremony with just our close friends and family. Chad and his wife Sarah said they wouldn't miss it for anything, since our whole group had bonded over surviving relationship disasters. We kept the guest list under 30 people and held it in the backyard of the house we'd just bought together. The morning of the wedding, I was getting ready when I realized Rex needed to be part of the ceremony somehow. Katie suggested making him the ring bearer and found a little bow tie and a special pouch for the rings. Watching Rex trot down the aisle with that bow tie and the rings made everyone smile and laugh. As he walked toward me with his tail wagging, I thought about how telling the truth about Mariella had cost me one family. But standing there watching Daniela walk toward me with Bailey as her flower dog, I realized I'd gained something better. This new family was built on honesty instead of lies, and protecting each other instead of covering up bad behavior. The ceremony was perfect and simple, with Jackson as my best man and Katie as Daniela's maid of honor. Chad gave a toast at the reception about how exposing lies had led all of us to find better lives with better people. Even Rex seemed to understand this was a special day, as he stayed right by my side the whole time. Thanks for sticking with me through all this. It's definitely been a journey worth sharing. Until we meet again, folks. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.